Bruce Lee and Bolo Yeung. Two names that echo through martial arts history like thunder. One symbolized speed, precision, and philosophy. The other embodied raw power, intimidation, and overwhelming physical strength. On screen, their brief moments together in Enter the Dragon electrified audiences. But what if the most intense confrontation between these two legends never made it onto film? What if the real clash happened away from cameras, without choreography, without scripts, and without an audience? Today, we're uncovering the real fight between Bruce Lee and Bolo Yeung, a battle that few people ever heard about, witnessed only by those who truly understood what was at stake. This wasn't just a sparring match. It was a test of martial arts philosophy itself. To understand how this fight came to be, we need to step back to one of the most important moments in martial arts cinema. Enter the Dragon wasn't just another movie. Released in 1973, it was Bruce Lee's magnum opus, the project that would finally bridge Eastern martial arts with Western cinema on a global scale. Bruce wasn't just starring in the film, he was shaping its soul. Every fight, every movement, every pause carried intention. He viewed combat not as spectacle, but as expression, a dialogue between bodies, minds, and philosophies. Originally, Bruce envisioned a much larger role for be-on-the-lookout Yeung in the film. He choreographed an intense, brutal fight between their characters, a confrontation meant to represent more than physical combat. It was speed versus strength, adaptability versus brute force, evolution versus tradition. This scene, according to those present, was designed to be unforgettable. But as production progressed, studio decisions changed everything. Warner Brothers made a strategic choice to streamline the narrative. They wanted the emotional and physical climax of the film to focus entirely on Bruce Lee's final confrontation with Han, the film's main antagonist. Adding another major showdown, they believed, could dilute the impact of that ending. As a result, Bolo's role was reduced, and the epic fight Bruce had planned was cut completely. On paper, it was a business decision. But behind the scenes, it set the stage for something far more personal. To understand why this mattered so deeply, we have to understand who Bruce Lee and Bolo Yeung were, not as actors, but as martial artists. Bruce Lee's journey began long before Hollywood ever noticed him. Born in San Francisco in 1940 and raised in Hong Kong, Bruce was immersed in performance from childhood. His father was a Cantonese opera performer, and Bruce appeared in films as a child. But the streets of Hong Kong were where he learned his most important lessons. Frequent street fights forced him to confront reality, unpredictability, chaos, and real consequences. At 13, Bruce began training in Wing Chun under Ip Man. But even then, he was different. He didn't simply absorb tradition, he questioned it. Why this stance? Why that rule? Why limit effectiveness for the sake of form? As he grew older, Bruce studied boxing, fencing, wrestling, and Western athletic conditioning. He began stripping martial arts down to its essence. What actually works? This mindset would later become Jeet Kune Do, not a style, but a philosophy. Adaptability over rigidity. Efficiency over ornamentation. Be like water. When Bruce moved back to America with barely any money, he taught martial arts while attending university. His willingness to teach non-Chinese students and openly challenge traditional boundaries made him controversial. But it also made him revolutionary. Bruce wasn't trying to preserve the past, he was building the future. Bolo Yeung's path could not have been more different. Born in Guangzhou in 1946, Bolo was deeply rooted in traditional Chinese martial arts from a young age. Discipline, repetition, and structure shaped his early training. But Bolo's destiny shifted when he discovered bodybuilding, something rare and unconventional in China at the time. He embraced it fully. Years of relentless weight training transformed him into something extraordinary. Massive, dense muscle. Unmistakable physical presence. By his early 20s, Bolo had already become Mr. Hong Kong, a title he would hold for 10 consecutive years. His physique alone commanded attention. When Bolo entered the film industry, he brought something unique. He wasn't just muscular, he was athletic, disciplined, and dangerous-looking. Directors didn't cast him to speak. They cast him to intimidate. His body told a story before he ever moved. By the time Enter the Dragon entered production, both men had already become icons in their own ways. Bruce was the philosopher warrior, reshaping martial arts itself. Bolo was the embodiment of raw physical dominance, tradition and power carved into muscle. Their contrast was impossible to ignore. Standing around 5 feet 8 inches and weighing roughly 140 pounds, Bruce Lee was lean, sharp, and explosive. Every movement was purposeful. His speed was legendary. His strikes arrived before opponents even realized they were under attack. But more importantly, Bruce thought several steps ahead. Combat, to him, was chess played at full speed. Bolo Yeung, shorter but heavier, was built like a fortress. Around 154 pounds of dense muscle, his strength was terrifying. His strikes carried devastating force. He relied on pressure, close the distance, overwhelm, dominate. Where Bruce flowed, Bolo imposed. Speed versus strength. Precision versus power. Endurance versus explosion. On screen, these differences made for compelling cinema. Off-screen, they created an unspoken tension. The set of Enter the Dragon wasn't just a film production, it was a gathering of real martial artists. Champions. Fighters. Future legends. Training sessions often turned into informal demonstrations, with artists exchanging techniques and testing ideas. Bruce's lightning-fast kicks and famous one-inch punch stunned those who watched. Bolo's feats of strength left others speechless. There was no hostility, but there was competition. As production neared its end and it became clear that Bolo's role had been reduced, the atmosphere subtly shifted. For Bolo, the cut fight scene wasn't just lost screen time. It was a lost opportunity to prove something. Not as an actor, but as a martial artist. And so, Bolo made a bold decision. He challenged Bruce Lee to a real sparring match. No cameras. No choreography. No rehearsed moves. Just two martial artists stepping into a ring to test their philosophies against reality. Bruce didn't hesitate. He never did. The fight began with Bruce doing exactly what he believed in. He controlled distance. He moved constantly, light on his feet, darting in and out. His strikes were fast, sharp, and precise, designed not to overpower, but to disrupt. Every movement forced Bolo to react. Bolo responded with pressure. He advanced, cutting off angles, throwing heavy strikes meant to end the fight decisively. Each blow carried immense power. If one landed cleanly, the fight could change instantly. But landing that blow was the challenge. Bruce's speed made him difficult to pin down. He slipped attacks, countered quickly, and vanished from range before Bolo could follow up. His unpredictability frustrated Bolo, forcing him to expend energy just trying to keep up. Minutes passed. And that's when the fight changed. Bolo's muscular frame, built for explosive strength, began to demand its price. His breathing grew heavier. His movements slowed slightly. Each attempt to close distance required more effort. Bruce, by contrast, seemed unfazed. His pace remained constant. His strikes remained sharp. Bruce sensed it. He increased the tempo. Short combinations. Quick entries. Relentless pressure. He forced Bolo to defend, to move, to react, draining his energy further. What had begun as a clash of power slowly became a test of endurance. 10 minutes in, the outcome was clear. Bolo was exhausted. His strength was still there, but his body couldn't deliver it effectively anymore. Bruce, still sharp and controlled, continued moving as if the fight had just begun. Eventually, Bolo conceded. There was no humiliation. No celebration. Just understanding. The fight had proven something fundamental. Raw power is formidable, but without endurance, adaptability, and efficiency, it fades. Bruce's philosophy had held up under real pressure. Speed, conditioning, and strategy had overcome brute strength. For Bolo, the fight was humbling, but not diminishing. Lasting 10 minutes against Bruce Lee was no small feat. It revealed limitations, yes, but also resilience. For Bruce, it wasn't about victory. It was validation. This wasn't just a sparring match. It was a real-world demonstration of martial arts truth. And that truth still resonates today. So the next time you watch Enter the Dragon, remember, the most important fight never made it to the screen. It happened quietly, behind the scenes, between two legends who believed in entirely different paths. One flowed like water. The other stood like a mountain. And on that day, water endured. What followed that encounter stayed mostly unspoken. There were no interviews, no press releases, no dramatic retellings splashed across magazines. Both men returned to set and continued their work professionally, but something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface. Those who witnessed the sparring match understood they had seen something rare, not a performance, but truth. Bruce Lee didn't boast about the fight. He never needed to. For him, the outcome wasn't about dominance or ego. It was confirmation. For years, critics had questioned his ideas. Traditionalists dismissed Jeet Kune Do as incomplete or disrespectful. Bodybuilders doubted that speed and technique could truly overcome size and strength. That sparring match quietly answered all of it. Not in theory. In practice. Bruce had always believed that conditioning mattered more than appearance. He trained his body like an instrument, not a monument. Long road work. Explosive interval training. Isometrics. Flexibility drills. Functional strength. Everything served a purpose. He didn't train to look strong, he trained to last. And in that fight, endurance became the deciding factor. Bolo Yeung, on the other hand, walked away with a different lesson. His power was real. His strength undeniable. But the fight revealed a limitation he couldn't ignore. Muscle demanded oxygen. Weight demanded energy. In a prolonged engagement, raw power without efficiency became a liability. It wasn't a failure, it was information. In many ways, that moment mirrored the larger evolution of martial arts itself. For generations, combat systems were built around rigid forms, traditions passed down unchanged. Bruce challenged that entirely. He believed fighting was alive, constantly evolving. The body, the opponent, the environment, nothing stayed static. To cling to fixed patterns was to fall behind reality. That philosophy didn't just shape Bruce's fighting. It shaped his life. Bruce Lee approached everything with the same intensity and curiosity. Acting, writing, teaching, philosophy. He questioned assumptions relentlessly. Why must it be done this way? What happens if we remove what doesn't serve us? That mindset made him dangerous, not just physically, but intellectually. It also made him misunderstood. Many people saw Bruce's confidence and mistook it for arrogance. They saw his rejection of tradition and labeled him disrespectful. But those who trained with him understood the truth. Bruce wasn't tearing martial arts down, he was stripping it bare. Removing illusion. Removing ego. Leaving only what worked. The sparring match with Bolo Yeung was a perfect illustration of that belief. There were no flashy techniques. No unnecessary movements. Just efficiency. Distance. Timing. Pressure. Recovery. Repeat. And that's why the story endured, even in silence. Word traveled quietly among martial artists. Among stunt performers. Among those who understood combat beyond cinema. It became one of those stories shared in hushed tones, not because it was scandalous, but because it was instructive. It carried a lesson too pure to sensationalize. Bruce Lee passed away not long after Enter the Dragon was completed. His death froze him in time, forever young, forever sharp, forever undefeated in the public imagination. Bolo Yeung continued his career, becoming one of the most recognizable villains in martial arts cinema history. His physique inspired generations. His presence remained iconic. But that moment, that unseen fight, stood apart from fame, legacy, and myth. It was real. It showed that fighting isn't about looking intimidating. It isn't about size alone. It isn't about tradition for tradition's sake. It's about understanding yourself, understanding your opponent, and adapting faster than circumstances change. That's why this story still matters. Not because Bruce Lee beat Bolo Yeung, but because it reminds us of something deeper. Strength fades. Speed fades. Even technique fades. But adaptability endures. In every discipline, not just martial arts, the same truth applies. The world doesn't reward rigidity. It rewards those who evolve. Those who stay light on their feet. Those who can flow around obstacles instead of crashing into them headfirst. Bruce Lee understood that better than anyone. And on that quiet day, behind closed doors, without applause or cameras, his philosophy wasn't spoken. It was proven. Years later, many who reflected on that encounter realized something else had taken place beneath the surface. The fight wasn't just between two men, it was between two eras. One represented the old belief that dominance came from size, structure, and tradition. The other represented a new understanding, that survival favors those who adapt faster than the world around them. Bruce Lee never intended to be a symbol, yet he became one. Not because he won fights, but because he changed how people thought about them. He forced martial artists to ask uncomfortable questions. If something doesn't work under pressure, why keep it? If a technique looks impressive but fails in reality, what value does it have? These ideas shook the foundations of martial arts culture, and that resistance followed him everywhere. Even on the set of Enter the Dragon, Bruce wasn't simply acting. He was teaching. Every movement was deliberate. Every fight scene carried layers of meaning. Those who trained beside him noticed it immediately. Bruce didn't waste energy. He didn't overcommit. He didn't chase strength for strength's sake. He conserved, calculated, and struck only when the moment was right. That's why the sparring match lingered in memory. Because it stripped away performance and left only truth. Bolo Yeung, to his credit, never dismissed the experience. He understood what had happened. In interviews years later, he spoke respectfully of Bruce, acknowledging his speed, conditioning, and intelligence. There was no bitterness, only recognition. Beyond the Lookout remained proud of his strength, but he also understood its limits. And that understanding is rare. Most people cling to what makes them feel powerful. Bruce did the opposite. He was constantly dismantling himself, rebuilding, refining. He believed stagnation was death. That belief drove him harder than any opponent ever could. The unseen fight became a quiet confirmation of that philosophy, not just for Bruce, but for everyone who witnessed it. It showed that true mastery isn't about winning quickly. It's about lasting longer than resistance itself. That's why the story refuses to fade. In a world obsessed with spectacle, this moment mattered precisely because it wasn't won. There were no slow-motion shots, no dramatic music, no audience applause. Just sweat, breath, movement, and exhaustion. Just two men confronting reality without illusion. And reality made its choice. When people ask today who would win, speed or strength, they're asking the wrong question. The real answer lies somewhere deeper. The fighter who understands himself best. The one who wastes the least. The one who adapts first. That's what Bruce Lee represented. Not invincibility. Not perfection. But awareness. And that's why, decades later, this unseen fight still captures the imagination. Because it reminds us that the most important battles in life aren't always visible. They don't happen on stages. They don't earn applause. They happen quietly, in moments where philosophy meets pressure and only what's real survives. Bruce Lee didn't need the fight to be filmed. He didn't need it to be remembered. Because the lesson was never meant for the screen. It was meant to endure. And perhaps that is the greatest reason this story continues to resonate. Not because it adds another victory to Bruce Lee's legend, but because it strips the legend down to its core. It reminds us that Bruce was not a mythological figure immune to challenge. He was a man who constantly put his ideas on trial. He welcomed confrontation, not out of arrogance, but out of curiosity. He wanted to know if his beliefs could survive reality. That willingness to test oneself is rare. Most people build identities around what they are already good at. They avoid situations that might expose weaknesses. Bruce did the opposite. He sought friction. He sought resistance. He believed pressure revealed truth faster than theory ever could. That is why the sparring match with Beyond the Lookout Yeung mattered so deeply to him, even if he never spoke about it publicly. For Bruce, the fight wasn't about proving he was better. It was about proving the path was right. And in that sense, Bolo Yeung played an essential role. Without someone so physically powerful, so imposing, so confident in strength, the test would have meant far less. Bolo was the perfect counterweight. The mountain that water needed in order to prove it could flow. The silence that followed the fight speaks volumes. There was no attempt to monetize it. No effort to mythologize it. In an industry built on exaggeration, that restraint feels almost unnatural. But it fits perfectly with who Bruce Lee was. He believed that true understanding didn't need validation. If something was real, it would endure without explanation. That is exactly what happened. Over time, martial arts evolved. Mixed disciplines replaced rigid styles. Conditioning and endurance became central. Adaptability became the standard. Fighters learned to cross-train, to blend systems, to abandon what didn't work. Long before these ideas became mainstream, Bruce Lee had already lived them. The unseen fight was not an isolated incident. It was a glimpse into the future. Today, when people watch fighters who combine speed, strength, intelligence, and endurance, they are witnessing the echo of Bruce's philosophy. When athletes train for efficiency instead of appearance, they are following a path he carved decades earlier. When martial artists abandon dogma in favor of effectiveness, they are unknowingly honoring his legacy. And Bolo Yeung remains part of that story, not as a defeated opponent, but as a necessary contrast. Strength has its place. Power matters. Intimidation can win battles. But without balance, without conditioning, without adaptability, it cannot win wars. That lesson extends far beyond martial arts. Life itself is a prolonged engagement. It tests endurance more than explosiveness. It rewards those who can adjust when plans collapse. Those who conserve energy, learn from resistance, and keep moving when others burn out. Bruce Lee understood that. That is why this story still circulates quietly, shared not for spectacle, but for meaning. It is passed down not as gossip, but as insight. It doesn't ask to be believed blindly. It invites reflection. And perhaps that is the true reason people can't let it go. Because deep down, everyone recognizes the truth it reveals. That the greatest victories are not always witnessed. That the most important tests are often private. And that real mastery is proven not in moments of triumph, but in moments of endurance. Bruce Lee didn't need the world to see that fight. Because the world would eventually catch up to the lesson it taught. And so the story ends where it truly began, not with noise, but with understanding. Bruce Lee never chased validation. He didn't need trophies, headlines, or witnesses to confirm who he was. His confidence came from something far deeper, alignment between belief and reality. When pressure arrived, his philosophy held. When fatigue set in, his preparation carried him forward. When the fight demanded adaptation, he adapted. That is why this unseen encounter matters more than any choreographed scene ever could. Because it reminds us that truth does not announce itself loudly. It reveals itself quietly, in moments where excuses disappear and only capability remains. No audience. No second takes. No illusion. Just reality. Bolo Yeung walked away from that fight unchanged in reputation, yet changed in understanding. Bruce Lee walked away unchanged in humility, yet strengthened in certainty. Neither man needed to speak about it. The outcome spoke for itself, not as a victory, but as a lesson. And that lesson continues to ripple outward. Every fighter who prioritizes conditioning over appearance. Every athlete who values efficiency over ego. Every individual who chooses adaptability instead of rigidity is unknowingly echoing what was proven that day. Bruce Lee didn't win because he was faster. He didn't win because he was smarter. He didn't win because he was stronger. He endured because he was prepared to evolve. That is the part most people miss. Legends aren't created by moments alone. They are created by principles that survive pressure. Bruce Lee's legacy endures not because of what he showed the world, but because of what he tested when no one was watching. And somewhere behind the scenes of cinema history, without cameras or applause, one of the most important demonstrations of martial arts truth ever took place. Not on film, not on record, but in reality. And that is why it still matters.